It wasn't that I thought, but I was sure Lindbergh had killed the kid. Runyon and Adela all night, every night in the coach house after the courtroom. Anyone would have to unwind, which is to say, knock it back, which we surely did, and had to, after that fog, and I have to call it a fog, and I'll tell you what it was, though Hearst refused to use the term, a fog of bloodlust. Looking back, I can't blame them, for it was a trifle purple. I came on the Evening Journal, and some kind soul in rewrite took it in his head to fix a bit of colour. In my second piece on Broadway, I mentioned a half-dead dog. The dog, of course, nosing the crushed orchids in the gutter left by the departing uptown crowd. They were passed into their limousines, and many corsages, which had withstood the 3 hours' well-bred immobility in the face of well-written trash, would not remain fixed during the hasty repair into the privacy of the family car. The flowers fell into the street, and the cars drove off. There I was, leaving the theatre in need of solace, and I leant against the wall of the alleyway leading back to the stage door. There, smoking 2 cigarettes and musing upon the vagaries of life, and how the ancient religious ceremony of the drama had mutated over the years into a celebration of the right of human beings to cover their faces with ooze and tromp around the stage while trying to remember how to speak their native tongue, and so on. Well, my throat was dry, and it was time to hike myself up and step around the corner to 8th Avenue and our then favorite Speak. Runyon and Adela, Williams and so on, there to decry the effete badinage which we imagined was the amusement of our lesser, though better paid, confreres at the Algonquin. Hiking myself, as before, I saw the standard issue mongrel dog nosing the fallen flowers, so I stuck him in the piece, where he appeared as half-dead dog. The copy desk it was struck out the half-dead, or not dead at all, the latter state better referred to as alive. This was, of course, an unaccredited reference to Mr. Twain's Pudd'nhead Wilson, where we will remember Wilson gets off the steamboat and witnesses the obnoxious, mischievous antics of a local dog. "I'd like to buy half of that dog," he says. When asked what he would do with half a dog, he replies, "I'd kill it." The locals, unused to irony, dub him a fool, and now this fool of a copy editor mangles my tasty prose in an homage to Samuel Clemens. I ask you, I, fool that I was, complain to all on high and receive a copy of a memo from Crouch, who was then the editor, to this effect: "Know all by these presents that whenever Miss Kilgallen wishes to refer to any organism, she may employ, by her choice and without reservations employ, any system of fractions which she finds good." The note circulated to all the members of the Evening Journal. Whom, in effect, did I think I was? Some bright Catholic girl who wrote too good to be corrected. Oh my. And the dog was half dead. But how did it make the sentence better? How did it improve the story? But, apropos, I learned in my response the meaning of bloodlust, for it was then to me transgression, indeed, an atrocity against the human spirit, this loathsome copy editor's act. And I would have been glad to see him dead. Funny? Not particularly. True? Yes. And it was not the passing years which showed me my sin, but the memo from Crouch. For, what the hell? We were just bringing out a newsletter. We called it the Evening Journal, but finally it didn't differ much from the Paducah ladies of the Evening Star monthly, and if we could write better than they, why then, let us do so and shut the hell up about it. But I understood bloodlust. Now, the Lindbergh trial. There we were in Flemington, New Jersey. Most of us went back to the city at the close of play, but Runyon and Adela and I stayed there in 3 rooms Hearst had managed to extort for us at the Flemington house. Mencken called it the biggest story since the resurrection, and, upbraided by what some considered irreverence, apologized in print and changed it to the biggest story including the resurrection. What a gadfly. But he liked to drink. There, day after day, there's Bruno Hauptmann sitting there, and now this one and now that one are performing as in some ritual Japanese dance, pretending disinterested service of the truth, which everybody knew was just the fan dance before the foregone conclusion and his execution. Please. Because to doubt the rectitude of the proceedings, to label it vigilantism, was to indict the claim of Lindbergh to justice. Lindbergh, the eagle of the air, Lindbergh. What had he done? He'd flown across the ocean. Who could dispute it? Was he the first? He was, by our count, the 6th, probably the 8th or 10th. He was the first to fly alone. All right. What was the major difficulty in flying solo? How was it geometrically more worthy than flying with multiple pilots? The difficulty consisted in this: staying awake. That's it. The flight, and let me inject here the traditional disclaimer not to disparage his accomplishment, was 33 hours. This is a long time to concentrate. However, I've done it. You've done it. It is a matter of course for journalists, soldiers, cops, doctors, nurses. It is a day and a half. Why did he fly solo? To save weight, as many of the previous attempts had crashed on takeoff. He stripped the plane of all excess weight, notably an additional engine and an additional pilot, pointed himself east, the wind at his back, flew to France and turned left. He was a very good pilot. And it so fell out that he became an international icon. Was he fitted for the role? Who would be? Royalty. But they're bred and trained from birth to do the one thing: sit in an open car and wave. Now, however, this fellow, a good pilot, an airmail pilot who'd set a record, became the authority for all things bright and beautiful, all creatures great and small. The Morgan Bank took him on to manage his affairs, and he married one of the partner's daughters. But think, it could easily have gone the more American way, and he could have made his fortune as the poster boy for shaving cream, cornflakes, automobiles, so on. But he was taken up as some new sort of avatar. He was some new thing who, Icarus-like, if you will, had flown too near the sun, perhaps, and now had come to grief. But we, convened as the audience to this tragedy, would not have it. No, we protested. This is not the verdict of the fates. They have erred. We will show them the error of their ways and dispatch their messenger. There he is, Bruno Richard Hauptmann. Who was he? A reformed or unreformed criminal, convicted twice in Germany of embezzlement, petty theft. In New York he fell in with his like and received funds from another criminal, Isidore Fisk. He's asked to keep some as monies owed him by Fisk, and to guard the rest in trust for Fisk, who had been called away. Fisk goes to Germany and dies. Hauptmann begins to spend the money. The money is marked. It is the ransom Lindbergh had paid for the return of his son. Hauptmann is apprehended, but is he the kidnapper? Back and forth, the gang at the Flemington house. I say he had an alibi. He was at work as a carpenter at the time on some job on Riverside. But, however, the employment log for that day had been destroyed by the accidental upset of a pot of ink. Stop right there, now. The ladder supposedly used to take the child from his room was a hodgepodge of tacked-together scraps. Hauptmann was asked if he had made the ladder. He replied, "I am a carpenter." A carpenter could not, under whatever duress, have made that ladder. Yes, I say. Yes, I say. There we are, arguing at the Flemington house. In comes the news about Violet Sharp. We're sitting there, arguing. In comes the little fellow, a cub, a gopher, I think, for Runyon. He wore a bow tie. The maid killed herself. What maid? Violet Sharp, the Lindbergh's maid. I'm sorry. The kicker being the attitude of those at the bar. How, I asked, do you, criminal knights of the American experience, explain? He had the money, Adela said. No, not the evidence. Explain your attitude. What of your prized skepticism? Back and forth. Until I, newly introduced to psychiatry, led with the Queen of Hearts, which was, I understand your attitude, for I have discovered its name. Its name is resistance. Guffaws, jokes about old bearded Jews, couches, and smoke-filled consultation rooms on West End Avenue. Your dogmatic insistence on Hauptmann's guilt is but the more genteel expression of the lynch mob fury found in the courtroom. You admit it, need to see him dead. Momentary silence. Why? Runyon said. To stop the investigation, I said. Why? Runyon said. To spare you from admitting that you know the secret. The silence continues, and in the silence, any doubts I might have had are conquered. For nobody says, what secret? And the secret, of course, was that Lindbergh had killed his son, and that we, having accorded him more fame than that given to any man, could not then admit our error. He was merely a human being, and to save ourselves from the revelation, we were intent upon making a human sacrifice. We wanted then to kill not Hauptmann, but Hauptmann as the human symbol of our sin, that we had raised a man to the status of a god. I finished my speech, and, quite proud of myself, regained the seat I'd quit in my exuberance. Everyone tapped their glass and shouted, "Hear, hear," and "Dorothy forever," roared with laughter, embraced me with that fondness we reserved for beloved folly. Hauptmann was executed, and the night before the district attorney had come to offer him a commutation to life in prison in return for a confession. Hauptmann refused. You tell me. Well, they came to offer me the Broadway beat, and I replied with the old saw, "What is the one requirement to write dramatic criticism?" Answer, "Lack of sufficient ability to write sports." Crouch said, "We don't want you to be a critic. We want you to write color." "Like the half-dead dog," I said. He smiled, that same indulgent smile I saw during the Lindbergh trial. He did it, you know, I said. Flying the airmail route, a fellow pilot came in 5 hours in a plane over the desert and went, as he always did, to the water pail for a long, long drink. Lindbergh had filled the water pail with kerosene. Any man who'd do that would do anything, and he'd done it before. He hid the boy and told everyone the boy had gone missing, did it twice. Who told you that? He said. Violet Sharp, I said, the maid. You never reported it, he said. No, she told me off the record. Did she tell you anything else? He said. Nothing that I didn't already suspect, I said. You went to the funeral, he said. Yes, I did, I said. And to the wake. And I go to our Mother of Mercy most years, to her grave at Easter. But I missed last year because of the snowstorm. Now, Sister Mary Immaculata taught me at an early age that an attachment to the things of this world was a mental addiction. Dr. Feininger would have called it a neurosis, I suppose, and Sister would consider that term, had she known it, sinful lack of courage, for, as she said, we are all going home. And to shun difficulties in that happy journey is one with embracing those same difficulties and calling them life. I have struggled with that long enough to understand that. Likely she did too. And I am close at times to an acceptance of her notion that this life is sin, or otherwise that it is not life which is that we progress toward, to the extent we are free of the things of this world. The man who chose death over dishonor, for that is what I believe he did, was a religious man. He had been a criminal, as were the two thieves, as are you and as am I. And perhaps, as Runyon said, he chose not to live with his guilt, or he took an easy out instead of a life of incarceration. I don't think so. But it came to me, for Runyon was not often wrong, that perhaps he chose death rather than a continued life in this unjust world. That certainly could be. That could be. And so perhaps it was a disservice to offer him the commutation, for it put the choice upon him. For imagine the poor man forced by choosing death into a shameful abandonment of his family, and weigh it against his embrace of what perhaps they could understand as his defense of the family's honor. Honor. A rather different thing than reputation. We remember. In any case, he made the choice, which perhaps should not have been offered him. Someone went to the prosecutor, who went to the governor, who made the offer. Someone had heard the maid's confession and promised to take the particulars to the grave. And Runyon asked me if I'd heard the rumors that Hauptmann was offered life in prison but refused. I told him I had, but not that I'd heard it from the prosecutor who took the maid's story to the governor. It was the crime of the century for a few years. Or perhaps the crime of the century, as Runyon said, was the century itself. He showed me a piece of writing that he was working on, and I said of the phrase, "Nix it, it's too neat. Half-dead dog, nosing crushed flowers, Lindbergh, crime of the century, Leopold and Loeb, Ruth Snyder, Daily Mail sneaks a photographer in to snap her picture during the electrocution. Page 1. I had 10 years of it. They say you become inured. The more accurate word is sad. They offered me the Broadway beat. 40 guys named Kelly in the mounted patrol. Bright spot in anyone's day. Got a match, Dorothy? Got a cigarette, Sarge? Did you ever miss writing crime? I saw last night's Eugene O'Neill play, I said, and that was a misdemeanor at least. Yes, he said. I saw them coming out. They were subdued. Do you prefer comedy? I don't know that I do, he said. I like the human comedy, kept in its place. What place is that? I said. Viewed from the height of a horse, he said, while in possession of a nightstick and a revolver. Kelly, I said, you're a Don Quixote. Well, he said, I've long suspected I was some sort of donkey. Thank you for the specificity. You can see the world in a grain of sand, but I prefer the theatre district. Good talking to you.